Good morning. The Senate Armed Services Committee meets this morning to hear testimony about how the Army and Marine Corps are planning to implement the Secretary of Defense's decision to open all ground combat units to women. We welcome our witnesses this morning, Secretary of the Navy Ray Mabus, Commandant of the Marine Corps General Robert Neller, Acting Secretary of the Army Patrick Murphy, and Army Chief of Staff General Mark Milley. We thank you for being here this morning and for your many years of distinguished service. This hearing is not about whether women can serve in combat. The fact is that women have served honorably in our military for years. They've filled critical roles in every branch of our military. Some have served as pilots like Martha McSally, Congresswoman Martha McSally, who flew combat missions in Afghanistan. Some served as logisticians like Joni Ernst, who ran convoys into Iraq. Others have served as medpics, intelligence officers, nuclear engineers, boot camp instructors, and more. Many of these women have served in harm's way. Women like Army Specialist Monica Lynn Brown, who ran through insurgent gunfire and saved the lives of her wounded comrades by using her body to shield them from incoming mortar fire. Women like Army Sergeant Leanne Hester, who led a counterattack that defeated an ambush by 50 insurgents and saved the lives of her fellow soldiers. Many women have made the ultimate sacrifice in the service of our nation, including 160 killed in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. We honor their service and sacrifice, and we honor them. That's why when then Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta lifted the ban on women serving in combat 3 years ago, I supported that decision. But as I said then, as this decision is implemented, quote, it is critical that we maintain the same high standards that have made the American military the most feared and admired fighting force in the world. We have a responsibility to do the right thing, but we also have an equal responsibility to do the right thing in the right way. That is what this hearing is about, ensuring that as women move into more positions across our military, the readiness, combat effectiveness, and the safety and well-being of all service members, both men and women, remain our paramount priority. On December 3, 2015, Secretary Carter announced that the Department of Defense would lift the ban on women in ground combat units. In advance of this decision, both the Army and Marine Corps sought to assess the physical and readiness impacts of integrating women into their ground elements, including through special field studies. The Army study simulated tasks to determine what the gender-neutral standards should be for each occupational specialty based on physical tasks. The Marine Corps simulated the combat environment with men and women Marines living and working together under combat-like conditions. These studies, while different in their approach, are complementary in their results. For the first time, they helped establish objective, scientifically based standards for the tasks required for ground combat. They found that certain women could meet these standards, but both studies also found that when performing brute physical tasks, on average, these higher performing women were generally comparable to lower performing men, and that in the process, women sustained higher rates of injury than men. Indeed, only 2 women Marines were able to complete the combat activities simulated in the Marine Corps study due to extremely high rates of injury to lower extremities. In short, the Army and Marine Corps studies demonstrated that biological differences between men and women can have implications when it comes to the sustained physical activities involved in combat. Rather than honestly confront these realities, some have sought to minimize them. Indeed, we have even heard attempts to disparage the women Marines who participated in the study at 29 Palms as somehow less than our best. In fact, these women were top caliber Marines, self-selected and chosen to participate based on their aptitude and physical strength. I hope that Secretary Mabus and others who have spoken ill of these women will repudiate these comments. Put simply, I am concerned that the Department has gone about things backwards. This consequential decision was made and mandated before the military services could study its implications and before any implementation plans were devised to address the serious challenges raised in the studies. Indeed, our services now have the authority to begin contracting women for ground combat positions, but the Congress is yet to receive any implementation plans. Our witnesses are here today to address these concerns and the many questions that still remain. For the members of this committee to perform our oversight responsibilities, we need to know what the gender-neutral military occupational specialty tests will look like, when they will be administered, how often they will be administered, and how they will interact with the current physical fitness standards, which are currently gender normed. We need to know how women service members will be set up for success to serve long and healthy military careers while maintaining high standards. And while the services are committed to maintaining standards that are tied to specific military occupational specialties, we know that over time, political pressure will come to bear to increase the number of women in combat arms specialties. We expect to hear the witnesses address these important concerns. Most importantly, we need to hear from a professional military perspective how integrating women into scout sections, infantry squads, tank crews, artillery batteries, and combat engineers will improve the readiness and combat power of our ground units. After all, that is the overriding mission of our nation's military. Recent experiences in Afghanistan and Iraq serve as a stark reminder that close combat remains brutal and uncompromising. Warfare has changed over the years, but the duty of our fighting men and women from the Second World War to Vietnam to today remains the same: to close with and destroy the enemy. It is conducted in dangerous and austere environments. No other human activity is more psychologically straining, morally demanding, and more physically stressful. High physical standards alone do not assure success in ground combat. Ultimately, these standards must be devised and implemented in a manner that ensures that we treat our soldiers and Marines fairly, but that we never offer the enemy a fair fight. That's why we must be uncompromising in our insistence on training to high standards. That's why we must preserve the small unit cohesion and discipline that ensures small combat units can win and survive on the forward edge of the battlefield. Troops in close combat bear the heaviest burden across the entire Department of Defense. And going forward, it is the well-being of those service members, whether they be men or women, that must override every other concern. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to join you in thanking our witnesses for joining us today to provide testimony on how their respective services will successfully integrate women into combat occupations and the ground combat forces in particular. I would like to thank each of you and the services you represent, and as well as the Air Force, which is not represented here today, on the deliberative processes that you have taken in studying this issue over the past several years. Secretary Panetta and General Dempsey initiated this effort in 2013, and since then each service has conducted research and studied performance to validate occupational standards for every military occupation. While today's hearing is focused on the difficult and challenging aspects of integration within the ground combat forces, it is important to remember that hundreds of thousands of positions have been open to service to women over the past several years. Many of these positions were considered not too long ago as available for men only for many, many reasons. This assumption has been disproven by the performance of female personnel in those occupations already open to all genders. Now that the decision to open all positions to women has been made, it is important that we turn our focus to the successful integration of females into these positions. Leadership is the key to ensuring both individual and collective success, as it was when other military occupations were open to women. I have every confidence that each of you will implement this decision smartly and successfully. Part of this process, as I mentioned, is the statutory requirement to establish gender-neutral physical, mental, and technical occupational standards, which any service member, male or female, must meet as a condition to serve in any particular occupation, including the combat arms. This is critical. As many members have said over the past several years, it is important that our war-fighting capability not be reduced. There is a tendency, however, to equate warfighting capability solely with physical capability. Fighting and winning wars, as I'm sure our panelists know well, much more so than I, involves much more than that. I believe that the full and successful integration of women into the combat arms, for a variety of reasons, will strengthen and enhance our warfighting capabilities. Integrating women into ground combat units also must be reflected in how and who we recruit and how we assess capabilities at the recruit stage to maximize successful service and minimize attrition. Not all women will be able or even interested in serving in the combat arms, but I believe many, particularly those with the required physical ability and the necessary mental toughness for service in the combat arms, may now be drawn to the ever greater and equal opportunities provided by military service. I look forward to hearing how the services plan to recruit and assign individuals for service in the combat arms, what plans you have for developing predictive tests at the recruit stage to assess the potential for success of a given recruit, and what challenges you face and foresee. Finally, I believe it's important for the services, but particularly Army and the Marine Corps, to develop plans and strategies to mitigate the physical stress and toll that a career in the ground combat profession has on every soldier and Marine, men as well as women. Part of successful implementation will be ensuring the ability to serve a full career regardless of gender. I thank you for your time, your expertise, and look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would like to begin with you, Secretary Mabus.
Sorry, Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, members of this committee. Issues before us today are of vital importance, as you've heard, to the future of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of the Navy, the Department of Defense, and our nation as a whole. The question at issue is very straightforward. How do we maintain and improve the combat effectiveness of our military as we execute the decision to open all previously closed positions to women? Serving as Secretary of the Navy is the greatest honor of my life. Every single decision I make is in support of maximizing the combat effectiveness of the United States Marine Corps. For almost 7 years as Secretary, I've been talking to Marines face-to-face about being Marines, about making Marines, and the Marines' warfighting ethos. I've seen them at Quantico, at Paris Island, at San Diego, and at nearly every stop that I've made in the almost 1.2 million miles I've traveled as Secretary, including every single forward operating base in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. I've spent time with Marines where they are serving and have seen firsthand that this decision to open all previously closed positions to women is putting policy in line with what is already reality, acknowledging the critical role women play and have been playing in mission success. The Marine Corps is the most formidable expeditionary fighting force the world has ever known. That legacy is proven through the Corps' storied history, from the halls of Montezuma to the valleys of Afghanistan, and that reputation is unquestioned in America and around the globe. No better friend, no worse enemy. The strong traditions of the Marines help make that reputation, and among those traditions is a commitment to evolve, to be flexible. And one of the common instructions given to young Marines, improvise, adapt, overcome. Throughout its history, the Corps has maintained its combat power and its lethality by adapting to changing conditions, evolving training and tactics to meet new challenges and new threats. Today's School of Infantry is not the same as it was just 25 years ago during Desert Storm, and the change is even more dramatic since Vietnam or World War II. In a world where the threats and the battle space are all increasingly complex, failing to reevaluate everything from personnel policies to weapons programs can be dangerous, if not fatal. A response of "that's the way we've always done it" is not, cannot, and never has been an acceptable rationale. In the Department of the Navy, we are continually evaluating the way we operate. After Secretary Panetta and Chairman Dempsey set us in 2012 on the path toward opening all billets, including ground combat, to women by this year, the Navy and Marine Corps, along with our sister services, conducted extensive studies on this issue. These studies helped inform the Department's recommendation to Secretary of Defense Carter and his subsequent decision to open all previously closed positions, all services, to women. But they were not the only source of information that was gathered in reaching that recommendation. However, the Marine Corps study has drawn special attention, and at least some of what's made it into public discussion is less than accurate. Among the misperceptions is that the Marines relied on just one study. In fact, their conclusions were based, in part, on a number of studies and reports. I've spent a lot of time closely reviewing all of them, especially the Marines' own study. In addition, I've had numerous discussions with senior Marine leadership, with junior officers, with enlisted personnel. First, and very importantly, I absolutely commend the Marines who volunteered for this experiment, for their work in assisting the Corps with approaching this integration process. I also appreciate the thoughtfulness, the diligence, and the sincerity of Marine leadership. Their time and effort helped to develop these standards, reinforce the importance of leadership, and set specific metrics for these demanding ground combat jobs. The most surprising finding in the Marine Corps study was that standards for many Marine Corps military occupation specialties, MOSs, just didn't exist. An incredibly important thing that came out of this study was the establishment of operationally relevant, occupation-specific, gender-neutral standards. The Marines deconstructed every job in ground combat to specifically detail its requirements so that individual members could function better as a team. So what we have now are a set of standards based on the actual requirements and demands for every Marine MOS, and the Corps is more effective and more ready because of this work. As I thoroughly examined the Marine Corps study, it was clear that the conclusions focused on the average performance of female Marines rather than on individual abilities. Averages don't tell the abilities and performance of an individual Marine. There were and are capable women who can meet the arduous standards the Marine Corps set for ground combat arms units. And we all know that Marines have never been about average. We also know, as Commandant Neller regularly and very correctly notes, and as his chairman in his opening statement said, this is not about women in combat. Women have been serving in combat and serving with distinction, and they've been recognized for it. 422 female Marines have earned the Combat Action Ribbon for their service in Iraq and Afghanistan for the various roles they played, to include the Lioness program and the female engagement teams. Female Marines have enhanced combat effectiveness by running convoys and security patrols, flying close air support missions, leading engineering platoons. They performed exceptionally on the front lines in places like Fallujah, Ramadi, and Sangin.
Mr. Secretary, I'd like you to try to truncate your remarks and summarize. We have other witnesses and questions by the committee.
Deal. The Marine Corps leadership have developed thoughtful and deliberate plans to execute this transition effectively. The Corps has already notified the 231 women who have successfully completed ground combat arms MOS training at formal learning centers that they can switch these previously closed jobs immediately if they chose to. Part of this transition is the evaluation of the training and education that we provide at every level, from recruits and officer candidates to the highest levels of leadership. And the Secretary of Defense highlighted education and training as a focus area as we began implementation of this policy. A point of discussion has been that the Marines are the only service which separates men and women at boot camp. I directed the Marines to brief me on a plan to integrate basic training. The Marines prepared a very thoughtful briefing and way ahead, which provided timely and informative considerations of the Department of Defense Implementation Group do their important work. With the benefit of their response, we can move forward in a measured and effective way, using the lessons of fully integrated, gender-integrated OCS and the basic school, as well as the lessons learned as Marines have opened up many MOSs in the past 3 years. With validated, operationally relevant, job-specific standards, the only test that is important is whether a person can meet those standards. Now, I know that suggestions have been made that those standards might be lowered down the road to achieve some quota, some numerical goal, but that's unacceptable. Unacceptable under the law, unacceptable to me, unacceptable to every other senior leader in the Pentagon, because it would endanger not only the safety of Marines, but the safety of our nation. Lowering standards would also be unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable to every Marine, especially those women who choose to compete for those positions. One thing is inviolate. Standards can never be lowered for any group or any job. Standards will evolve as threats evolve, but they will evolve for everyone equally. But just as there is no good argument to lower standards, there's also no good argument to bar anyone who has met those standards from serving. That is the American promise. It does not guarantee an outcome to anyone, but it does guarantee opportunity for everyone. For those who want to serve in these trying MOSs, these high standards will not make it easy, nor should they. But every person will have the opportunity. And for those who succeed, they will operate side by side with everyone else who has met the standard to be a Marine. Those Marines and this nation will continue to uphold the motto that Marines have fought and died under for almost 2.5 centuries, Semper Fidelis.
Secretary Murphy.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed.
Your complete statements will be made part of the record. Please go ahead.
Yes, Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. The Army remains in full support of Secretary Carter's directive to open every job to every soldier, regardless of gender. Following 3 years of study, then Secretary John McHugh recommended that no exceptions be made in implementation, and I concur with his recommendation today. This is the right decision for our Army. Our Army represents America and embodies the best of our values. The personal courage and selfless service made by women in our Army is no different than that exhibited by our men. We owe them the respect and honor to offer them the opportunity to succeed anywhere in our Army based upon only the merits of their performance. Practically, this is the right decision for our Army as well. As our Army gets smaller, our success increasingly depends upon our ability to maximize the contributions of every volunteer that fills our ranks. A soldier's ability to meet established standards that contribute to our success will remain our overriding factor moving forward. Recognizing these imperatives, the Army began integration efforts several years ago to take full advantage of America's diverse and deep talent. Practical knowledge gained from these efforts, complemented by several years of extensive research, collaboration, and practical evaluation, have led us to 3 primary conclusions. First, that women are capable of performing every job in the Army. This is not to say that every woman can do every job, just like every man cannot do every job. But no job in our Army has standards that cannot be met by women. Therefore, every soldier will have the opportunity, should they choose to do so, to compete against established standards for every position, to include the infantry, armor, and special forces. Next, we will maintain high individual standards of performance and professional conduct. These standards will continue to be based upon the requirements of the position and nothing else. We will continue to enforce them fairly and objectively across the force. Our guiding principle for these standards is and will remain exclusively their contribution to mission success. Finally, leadership is critical to integration. As Secretary Carter noted, the performance of teams is important, and integration will change these dynamics. Our leaders, enabled by comprehensive and deliberate education, will closely monitor these efforts. We cannot anticipate or control for every impact of integration, but this will not slow our progress. We will continue to monitor and report the lessons we learn so that our Army can collectively integrate the force and share our experiences. But we are prepared to act and benefit from integration now. Full integration will likely take several years, both to adjust the culture and to grow individual skills within our force. But I am confident that every leader in the Army will understand and respect the increased readiness that integration will bring. Underpinned by strong professional leaders, we will remain true to the values of the Army and to America and emerge as a stronger, more ready Army as a result. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
General Milley, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate it. And Ranking Member Reed, and thank you all for the opportunity to appear before you on behalf of America's Army and to discuss the Army's implementation plan for full integration of women. For the record, I fully support opening any military occupational specialty and all military occupational specialties in the United States Army to all soldiers, regardless of gender. It is my solemn duty as the Army Chief of Staff to ensure that the Army remains ready to defend this great nation, and to do so, we need the most capable and qualified men and women. Readiness is the Army's #1 priority, and I believe that full integration of women in all career fields will either maintain, sustain, or improve the overall readiness of the United States Army and our capability of the force. If, and only if, we maintain and enforce rigorous combat readiness standards, we remain a merit-based, results-oriented organization, and we apply no quotas and no pressure. We cannot compromise combat readiness and effectiveness for any reason whatsoever. The Army's implementation plan will be guided by a set of first principles. We'll maintain readiness by adherence very strictly to a set of standards, and we will not impose quotas on ourselves. We will execute a very deliberate, methodical, and transparent process. We must not rush to failure, and in this particular project, I believe that slow is smooth and smooth will be fast at the end of the day. We will set conditions by positioning female leaders in units who are engaged, and those units' leaders will be accountable. These principles are aligned with the guidance given to us by the Secretary of Defense. The Army has identified several key tasks required for full gender integration. When the SecDef approves our plan, we have developed and will implement published, measurable, gender-neutral standards based on combat readiness requirements. Next, we'll initiate gender-neutral training for all officers, non-commissioned officers, and junior enlisted. And to ensure the success, our plan calls for the deliberate and methodical approach that begins with assessment, selection, training, and assigning of female infantry and armor leaders, both officers and NCOs, to units. That's our leader's first principle. And then we will assign junior female enlisted to those units. I estimate that effective female integration into infantry, armor, and special forces will require no less than 1 to 3 years of deliberate effort in order to develop the individual skills and grow our leaders. The Army is currently in the process of ensuring our facilities comply with law and DoD policies for accession and gender-neutral living standards at both our basic and individual training. Additionally, we will provide leaders and soldiers with integration education and training to enhance our integration efforts over the course of this year. This spring, female cadets and officer candidates who meet the gender-neutral standard will be given the opportunity to request either infantry or armor branches, and that process is currently ongoing. The Army's integration plan is based on a successful record of opening occupations previously closed to women. Since 2011, the Army has opened 9 MOSs and approximately 95,000 positions in combat arms units. In fact, today, every single active duty infantry, armor, and field artillery battalion has women in them. Additionally, Task Force 160th, the 160th Special Operation Aviation Regiment, was open to women in 2014. And of course, as you know, the Army's Ranger School was opened last year. These experiences have informed and will enable the Army to successfully implement gender integration to increase our combat readiness. Make no mistake about it, this process is going to have challenges. But if we proceed with a methodical and deliberate execution, and like all previous integration efforts, it's my belief that the Army will be successful. I have personally witnessed in multiple tours of very intense ground combat, I have personally witnessed women perform, and their tasks were not much different than any other man that was on that battlefield. I have absolutely no doubt in my mind, in my professional judgment, that women, some women, can perform every single job in the United States Army, to include infantry, armor, and special forces. Army leaders will continue to assess, and we will adjust the process to ensure that our standards and combat readiness are maintained, and you, the committee, have my word on this. You also have my commitment that we will move forward in this endeavor in a very transparent and collaborative manner with this committee, with the American people, and with the Department of Defense. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
General Neller.
Chairman McCain, Ranking Member Reed, in the interest of time, I'd ask that my oral statement be submitted for the
Without
record.
objection.
I'm ready for your questions, sir.
Well, thank you. General Neller, you made a recommendation to request an exception to policy to keep some ground combat elements closed to women. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Commandant Dunford made that recommendation, and I was witting, and I supported that recommendation.
General Milley, do you agree or disagree with General Neller's exception to policy to keep some ground combat elements closed to women?
Senator, I made the recommendation to open up all MOSs.
I see. Secretary Mabus, your website has a counter that shows you traveled over 1 million miles on trips as Secretary of the Navy. How many of those miles took you to 29 Palms and Camp Lejeune for the purpose of viewing the Marine Corps Ground Combat Element Integrated Task Force study?
Senator, I've been to 29 Palms several times, and I've been to Camp
How many of
Lejeune
these
several
took
times.
you to there the purpose to view the Marine Corps Ground Combat Element Integrated Task Force study?
I did not, Senator.
So you, with a straight face, make claims that the Marine study was flawed and biased, even if you didn't even go see the study being performed. The 1,000-page Marine Ground Element study was released to you on August 31st. And one day after the release of the report on September 1st, this is a 1,000-page document, you gave an exclusive interview with the Navy Times in which you stated you saw no reason for an exemption to the gender integration policy. It's important to note you received the recommendation of the Commandant on September 17th, 2015. General Milley, when were you informed that this decision was going to be made?
For the gender integration, I was informed, I made my recommendations, and then there was a session with the Secretary of Defense, Service Secretaries, and the Service Chiefs.
Well, when were you informed that the decision was made?
The decision for this, opening up the MOSs, I'd have to go back, Senator, honestly, and check the notebooks in terms, give you an exact date, time group. But he made the decision to open it up, and we had a session, and he announced it to us shortly before the announcement.
General Neller, when were you informed of this decision?
Chairman, Secretary, or General Dunford made his recommendation, as you said, on the 17th. I assumed this office on the 24th. I believe this, I don't know the exact date that the Secretary forwarded his recommendation to Secretary of Defense Carter. But that when that was done, that's when I was informed.
One of the areas of some concern that have been voiced is the integration of basic training, given the fact that there is, when a person enters basic training, they have not been exposed to the discipline associated with basic training. Does that any concern to you, General Milley?
Senator, right now, for infantry and armor, the Army does not have integrated basic training, similar to what the Marines do right now for their recruit training. So it's at Fort Benning. I anticipate that after we set the conditions for this year, will probably enter women into infantry and armor basic training at the Maneuver Center down at Fort Benning sometime in the early fall, probably September, October of this year. So there are concerns, and we've got to make those adjustments between now and then in order to have women received at the basic training center.
I move that we require all studies the Marine Corps and Army conducted and considered for the decision to open combat units to women be included as part of the record for this hearing. Move that we include statements from outside organizations that were submitted in advance of the hearing today.
Okay.
So moved. Senator Reed.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your testimony. And General Milley, I was, as you, I think, suggested in your comments, very impressed that 3 officers, female officers, graduated from Ranger School, very demanding. From your professional experience and from my retrospective experience, they would seem to be entirely capable of leading an infantry unit in combat. Is that your conclusion?
Yes, Senator, I would say that those 3 women that graduate could perform satisfactorily in an infantry unit in combat.
And your approach, and I presume the approach of the Marine Corps also, will be moving forward on a step-by-step basis and integrating what you learn as you move forward, so that it's clear this is going to happen from your standpoint, but that it's going to happen in an informed, careful way so that the capability of the unit, combat effectiveness, is not jeopardized. That's fair to say?
Absolutely correct, Senator.
One other aspect of this issue, too, and I think it was alluded to in all the testimony, is that, and it's also reflected in a great deal of academic research recently, is that it seems that groups' collective intelligence increased as the number of women joined the group. And in fact, I think, General Nello, that one aspect of the Marine Corps study was that in those problems, those field problems that had more challenging cognitive elements, that is simply brute strength, the study found that the integrated teams performed as well or better than the all-male teams. Is that a fair estimate?
Senator, in the evaluation we did in that one particular part of the trial, there was a positive aspect of problem solving when the teams were integrated.
Right. And I think one of the other aspects, and again, this is more observation than conclusion, but we see battlefields that are increasingly more complex. I mean, what you've seen in Afghanistan and Iraq is not a force-on-force frontline LD departure. It's cultural activities, it's integrating with the community, it's picking up intelligence, it's doing lots of things that have a much more significant cognitive element than I would, again, this is more anecdotal than anything else, suggest might have happened on the battalion versus battalion warfare of World War II and other combat we've engaged in. That might suggest strongly that this direction is exactly the right direction to take. One other aspect, of course, is that, and I assume this, but I want your response, that if, in fact, the Marine Corps is not granted an exemption, you're fully prepared and expect the Marine Corps successfully will integrate women into their ranks. Is that correct?
Senator, the Secretary of Defense has made his decision that we were not granted an exemption. So we're in the process, and we have a plan which we submitted to successfully integrate women into these previously restricted MOSs and previously restricted units.
And you're confident that the Marine Corps will succeed as it always seems to succeed?
I want every Marine to succeed, Senator, so that's our goal.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that. One of the other aspects going forward with respect to this issue is essentially being able to recruit individuals in a very difficult, for want of a better term, market. Roughly 25% of the young people that are of enlistment age are physically and otherwise qualified right now because it's generally looked at as male-dominated, but this would expand, i.e., given the options for women, it would expand the number and the quality, I presume, of recruits that you could access. Is that a fair judgment? And I'll ask the Secretary, maybe Secretary Murphy, to comment.
That's a very fair judgment, Senator. As you correctly pointed out, only 1 out of 4 Americans age 18 to 24 qualify for our military for physical reasons, educational reasons, or criminal records. And to shrink that pool deprives us of a lot of talent.
Secretary Murphy?
That's correct, Senator, that we don't want to exclude 50% of the potential talent pool in America. We need all the able-bodied men and women, the best and the brightest and the toughest, to join our ranks, to sustain the all-volunteer force that we've had.
Let me just a final comment question very quickly, and that is, this is not just about the individual qualifications, it's also about the group performance. And that is a concern you all have to take into consideration as you move forward. But I just reflect, Secretary Mabus, for the longest time, submarine crews were all male because of the presumption that in that close, confined, extended tour, 6 months at sea, that dynamic would not work, and you have successfully, and the Navy has successfully integrated the crews on submarines so that they're both male and female. And what I'm hearing is that the record is very, very good in terms of performance. Is that fair?
That's absolutely correct, Senator. We integrated, the decision was made in 2010. Women have been going to sea in submarines since early 2011, and they perform magnificently, and there's been an increase, no decrease, and we think an increase in combat readiness for those submarines.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I first want to associate myself with the views of General Neller and General Milley that to discuss women serving in combat is something of a misnomer. Women have been serving valiantly in combat certainly for the last 15 years, and in reality much longer than that. So this is not really a question of women being in combat. This is about a limited number of roles, primarily in the Army and the Marine Corps, although the Air Force and the Navy do have some elite special operation forces that will be impacted. And within those two services, it's primarily about infantry and a few other combat-related roles. General Neller, since your service had requested an exemption, I'd like to direct this question to you. Secretary of Defense Carter has said he's confident that you can address all concerns of implementation. The Ground Combat Integration Task Force, though, did conclude that there are irreducible and obvious physiological differences between men and women. That's one reason why there are men and women's athletic events at the Olympics. Could you elaborate a little bit on how you plan to address these implementation questions?
Well, Senator, we learned a lot from the evaluation and the additional studies in other countries we looked at. So there's a lot of pieces to how we're going to implement this in a successful way. Part of it's going to be the standards that have been established to get into the entry level before you actually enlist, when you're at recruit training, and then the MOS qualifications. We're going to look at other ways to improve the physical capability of not just female, but all infantry Marines to reduce injury, because the incidence of injury is a concern. But I'm not sure how far we can go with that, just based on the simple fact in the infantry, the load-bearing requirements and the oxygen use, endurance between men and women. There's always exceptions. I mean, they are what they are. So we're going to look at this. We're going to monitor it. Part of our process is a continued study and evaluation to see what we can do and can't do to mitigate this, because at the end of the day, we have to maintain our readiness, and we want every Marine to be successful.
Thank you. I'm confident that whatever the policy direction you receive, you'll do the very best job you can, as will General Milley, to ensure that your Marines and your soldiers are set up for success, men and women alike. Secretary Mabus, I'd like to go to an interview you conducted last September about the study the Marine Corps conducted. You said, quote, "It started out with a fairly large component of the men thinking this is not a good idea and women will not be able to do this. When you start out with that mindset, you are almost presupposing the outcome." Which men in the Marine Corps had that mindset?
What I based that on, Senator, was some of the conclusions drawn from that study that were presented to me, which was that that the Marines that were chosen, the Marines who volunteered and who I brag on for doing that, they did a great job in terms of establishing standards. However, some of the conclusions that were drawn was that male Marines did not know how to, had not had any experience.
Well, Secretary Mavis, the conclusions speak for themselves. You're questioning the motives of Marine Corps leader in that statement.
No, sir, I'm
sounds
not.
like to me.
I'm speaking to the conclusions that were drawn, that the Marines, the male Marines in that experiment, most of them, very few of them, most of them had had no experience working with women in these occupations, and that they simply didn't know how to do that. And that was one of the conclusions, and that was one of the conclusions that said you had to provide that leadership, which is part of the implementation plan, that leadership to make sure that all Marines, male and female, know how to deal with the other gender in these very demanding roles.
Let's speak about the female Marines in that study. You also are quoted in that interview as saying, I mean, in terms of the women who volunteered, probably should have been a higher bar to cross to get into the experiment. Do you owe an apology to the women that participated in that study?
Senator, and I have the entire interview here, I know exactly what you're talking about. What I kept talking about was there were no standards for any of these when you started out. So the only thing that these women had to pass.
On the Marine Corps' physical fitness test, the women in that study outperformed the average female Marine as compared to the man performing the average male Marine. So the women are actually outperforming the average female Marine as compared to the men in that study.
On the generalized physical fitness test, combat fitness test, nobody had had to meet a standard for these ground combat units. Nobody. There were no standards in there. And one of the ways that General Neller just talked about, one of the ways that you ensure the integration is successful is by training to these very intense physical standards, and starting at recruit training, starting at MOS schools, starting there, and not just going to the very basic physical fitness test or combat fitness test.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Thank you. I think one of the questions we have to address now is registering for the Selective Service. As some of you may know, there was a Supreme Court decision back in 1981 when, in fact, the question was put in front of the Supreme Court whether women should be required to register for the Selective Service under current law. Justice Rehnquist wrote, the existence of combat restrictions clearly indicates the basis for Congress's decision to exempt women from registration. The purpose of registration was to prepare for a draft of combat troops. Since women are excluded from combat, Congress concluded they would not be needed in the event of a draft and therefore decided not to register them. So in other words, the rationale that Rehnquist used for saying there was no requirement of women to register for the Selective Service has now been eliminated. And I guess I want to ask all of you your sense of this. Part of me believes that asking women to register, as we ask men to register, would maybe possibly open up more recruits as women began to think about, well, the military is an option for me. And if you would briefly go down the line and give me your sense as to whether or not Congress should look at requiring Selective Service registration for all Americans.
Senator, it's my personal view that based on this lifting of restrictions for assignment to unit MOS, that every American who's physically qualified should register for the draft.
Secretary Mavis?
Senator, I think this, you very correctly pointed out, this needs to be looked at as part of a national debate, given the changed circumstances. The one thing you did say that's not Selective Service related, but that we do believe that this will open up recruiting, that more women will be interested in, I'll just talk about the Marines, in the Marines, because these last restrictions have been removed.
Secretary Murphy?
Senator, I believe that, yes, it should be a national debate, and I encourage the legislative body to look at that. I would say that unlike the decision in 1981, where we're now in the longest war in American history over the last almost 15 years, that we've had over 1,000 women killed or injured in combat. Now with this implementation, if you can meet the standard, you're on the team no matter what MOS it is. So I highly encourage that national debate, ma'am.
You would encourage what?
The debate.
The national debate, Mr. Chairman.
You asked for your opinion, Mr. Secretary.
Yes.
General Miley.
Senator, I think that all eligible and qualified men and women should register for the draft.
Well, I do too. I think it's the right thing going forward. I know that the Air Force has established a goal of having 30% of its active duty applicant pool be women. Have there been any goals established in either the Army or the Navy?
No, Senator.
Secretary Murphy? Or General, only either one?
Senator, approximately 14% of our soldiers are women. At West Point, when I was a professor there in 2000, 16% were women. Now it's 22% are women. But the Army looks to be reflective of our society.
But, Senator, you asked about goals.
Right. Just a goal. Not, obviously, we're not going to
The short answer is no. We have not set a goal for women in the infantry or the armor in terms of numbers or percentages whatsoever.
Okay.
Senator, could I just, on that?
Sure, sure.
Right now, just under 8% of the Marine Corps are female Marines, officer and enlisted. Even prior to this decision, I directed our recruiting look at the possibility of increasing the number of women in the Marine Corps to 10% and to see if we can make that goal.
I want to briefly give a shout out to, I do think there's some culture here. Nobody here wants the standards to be lowered. I don't, and I think, frankly, the people who really don't want the standards to be lowered are women. The last thing in the world a woman needs is to join a unit with everyone looking over their shoulder saying, well, you're not the same as we are. So I don't think anybody here thinks that standards should be lowered. And I want to point out that the sapper course at Fort Leonard Wood, I don't think anybody thinks that sappers are somebody, that course is easy. Obviously, you are combat trained in that course. For people who aren't aware, this is for specially trained combat engineers. And they've been taking women since 1999 at Fort Leonard Wood for this course. And it's tough. Now, the interesting thing about that, while there haven't been a lot of women that have taken it, the percentage of women who have completed is identical to the percentage of men who have completed, 50%. So I would certainly urge all of you to take a look at what Fort Leonard Wood has done and how they've done it in one of the toughest physical challenges that, you know, it's not the same as combat training, but they have to be combat ready to graduate from the sapper course. So I certainly wanted to give a shout out to what I think is great work being done at Fort Leonard Wood.
Thank you very much. And let me just say, you know, there's a real risk for anybody discussing this issue to appear insensitive or politically incorrect. And I really appreciated the way the chairman began the discussion this morning by outlining the very significant role that women, including members of this committee, have made for the military in terms of aviation, in terms of very, very difficult and demanding jobs. And that, Mr. Chairman, I appreciated you pointing out that's not what this hearing is about. What this hearing is about and what this change is about is the very demanding subspecialty of close combat. And as the chairman pointed out, close combat is brutal. It is physically brutal. The training for that is physically brutal, and so the question is, how can we how can we open this to a group of people when the physical realities seem to indicate that this is really a departure from what can work. Let me ask General Neller and General Milley. General Neller, let me start with the infantry officer course. Women have entered this course, am I correct? But no women have passed this course. Am I correct there?
Yes, sir. 29 Marine officer female have attempted, have not yet successfully completed the course.
Why is this test so rigorous? Why is it necessary that it be so rigorous?
It's an MOS producing school.
And for the benefit of people watching who might not know all of our jargon, tell us what MOS.
Military Occupational Specialty. This is where a Marine officer goes to become MOS qualified to lead an infantry platoon, a rifle platoon, or a weapons platoon. So the standards that exist there involve tactics, physicality, physical fitness, understanding weapons, and it's a very tough and demanding course.
Why?
Because they're going to lead their Marines in combat, and they have to be able to lead from the front, and they have to be able to understand all aspects of their profession, and they have to be physically fit enough and strong enough to be able to understand, to withstand the rigors of combat. And so the attrition is 25% for the men that go to this course. So it is a very tough, demanding course.
General Milley, would you comment on that in the same vein, sir?
I would agree with General Neller in that, the rigors of ground combat are brutal and they're hard, and we have very, very high standards, and they're directly related, not to gender, they're related to the combat tasks that you're expected to execute engaged against the enemies of our country. And we've developed, and the Marines have developed, very, very rigorous standards over many, many years. So those that make it, great, and if they don't, then they don't.
You know, we've had testimony from Secretary Mabus that reducing the standards would be unacceptable. Members of this committee have reiterated that is absolutely something that mustn't be done. But it's hard to imagine down the road, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, if we don't have successful graduations from this physically demanding program. It's hard to imagine that this conversation won't take a different tone, and I don't see how we can guarantee that in the future these standards will not be diminished. And so I would just say that, you know, I realize that you're in a tough spot, and you two generals have given us your best military judgment, and that's what we're asking in the testimony here. But as Senator McCain mentioned, we have an overriding mission, and that is to overwhelm the enemy in however we engage them. And in this special part of combat, where it's close combat, it never needs to be a fair fight. We need to put our strongest, and we need to put our best, and we always need to have the best people in. Let me ask you this, General: when people who are unlikely to pass the test are admitted, are we expanding the pool of candidates to accommodate women candidates for the infantry officer course? Are they keeping someone who might pass from getting a shot at this? Is that a consideration that we need to think about at all?
Senator, any officer at the basic school who wants to compete for an opportunity to be an infantry officer has the opportunity to do that.
Are there limited numbers of slots?
There's a number per course, but if the course were full, they would be able to stay. But each graduating class has a certain number. And there's a period of time, sometimes a course is full, and we allow a group of officers to stay and prepare. There's actually a preparation time because of the rigors of the course. So
Thank
there's
you.
no effort to deny anybody an opportunity to compete.
Okay, well, you know, I appreciate the task that you have been given as somebody who takes orders, and I wish you the best. We want to work with you, but I must say I have serious misgivings about moving to this particular point in our military. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope my good friend from Mississippi is not suggesting that if all of positions are opened up to women, that standards will automatically decline over time. That's what it sort of sounded to me like you were saying, so I hope that's not
I'm sure the senator
what you
can
were
give
saying.
you an explanation in private.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was pleased to hear everyone who's spoken today talk about the performance of women on the battlefield time and again, and pleased to hear most of you say that if a woman meets all the standards for the position, that she's qualified and that she should be allowed to serve, and that should be the end of the discussion, and that now the important thing is to focus on implementation of this policy. So I appreciate that and hope that on this committee and in Congress we can do everything possible to support you in that effort. Secretary Mabus, you have received criticism, as has been indicated this morning, for your support of combat integration, and I wonder if you could elaborate. You alluded to why you think this is so important, but can you elaborate on why you think it's important and how you think it could strengthen our all-volunteer force?
Senator, a more diverse force, as you heard from the question from Senator Reed, more diverse force, diversity of outlook, diversity of experience is a stronger force. We've proven it over and over again. When we integrated the armed forces in the late 40s, we came out with a stronger force. The same thing when we began to recruit larger numbers of women in the 80s. We came out with a stronger force. The same thing when you repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We came out with a stronger force at the end. And as long as you keep the standards, and as long as those standards are not arbitrary, that they're operationally relevant, they're job-related, then gender ought to be irrelevant, because what a Marine on the line wants to know about any Marine on either side is, did they have to meet the same standards? Do they have to do the same things that I had to do to be here? And that's why I believe that this will strengthen the armed forces, and this will strengthen the Marine Corps. Senator Reed asked about submarines. We have seen how it has strengthened Navy units that are fully integrated, and it's virtually every one. So I do believe that a more diverse force, because not about quotas, not about gender, but just about experience and perception, is a stronger force. And that's all of our jobs, is to make this a more effective, more lethal fighting force.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Secretary Carter directed the services to provide their final detailed implementation plans no later than January 1st of 2016. General Neller and General Milley, can you confirm that those implementation plans have been provided, and do they have to be approved, and has that been done yet?
Senator provided our plan to the Secretary of the Navy, and he forwarded it to the Secretary of Defense. We're still waiting for those plans to be approved, and we expect that that's going to happen here shortly.
General Milley?
Same thing, Senator. We provided our plan to the Secretary of Defense, and we're waiting on approval.
And you expect that to happen in the near future?
I really don't know when. I do expect it at some time in the relatively near future, but I don't know when.
Again, part of that directive required the services to begin implementation no later than April 1st, 2016. So are we assuming that we're on course to do that? Is everybody in agreement with that, General Miller?
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, it's no later than 1 April pending approval. So the Secretary had a session with us, and he told us, execute when I've approved your plan. You know, the target date is 1 April, but we're not supposed to execute prior to his approval.
General Neller.
The same thing, Senator. I mean, and part of this is, as General Milley said, this isn't going to happen 1 April, that we're going to see, I mean, some of it's already happened. We've
Sure.
got 239 females in what were previously restricted units and MOSs they already hold, and we've been doing that for several years. So that's already ongoing. But the beginning to recruit those that can meet the standards that now exist before you go to recruit training, while you're at recruit training, and the MOS standards at school, that has not yet begun. And that's going to take some time.
And I'm out of time, but my final question was, is there, is part of the plan address a response to concerns that may be raised by other folks who are part of this effort about fully implementing the policy? And I will we'll submit that for the record to ask you to respond to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a statement followed by questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me be clear. I fully support providing women the opportunity to serve in any military capacity. As long as standards are not lowered, our combat effectiveness is maintained. But in order to ensure women are fully integrated into these previously closed positions, the implementation strategy must be fully developed and methodically and deliberately carried out. It must include an understanding of second and third order effects to ensure that we do not set women or men up for failure. These are the men and will be the women who meet our enemies in close combat. Their lives depend on it. That is why over the past few weeks, I have visited Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia, to speak directly with Army and Marine infantrymen about this topic. I spoke with groups comprised mostly of mid to senior level NCOs and junior officers, the service members who over the past 14 years of war have met the enemy in close combat and who will do so again in the future with their female counterparts. After those conversations, it is clear that we need to ensure that we are taking into account the impacts on women's health, lodging, physiological differences between men and women, which could lead to female physical fitness test scores on average being lower than their male counterparts, and how that could affect their ability to compete for promotions, schools, and senior command positions. I would encourage all of the members of this panel and our witnesses to go talk to our service members, hear for yourselves what their concerns are, and help ensure we ultimately get this right. Our combat armed soldiers and Marines are the best we have. They have taken the majority of casualties since the founding of our nation and on battlefields from Yorktown, Gettysburg, Iwo Jima, and Normandy. They have made the difference between Americans enjoying life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or being subjugated by foreign powers. Their lives mostly involve suffering and hardship, and they honorably carry that physical and mental burden, not only in service, but afterwards as well. We must honor them by ensuring this process moves forward in a thoughtful and methodical way. General Neller, I'd like to start with you, sir. As you know, some of our female Marines have voiced concerns that they anticipate there will be pressure to lower standards if not enough of them are able to qualify to serve in combat positions. While I'm glad that lowering the standards for greater female participation is against your best military advice, I agree with these women that pressure may come, likely from civilian leadership who may have motives other than supporting gender integration to enhance our nation's ability to destroy our enemies on the battlefield. Also, in order to boost participation, some female Marines have voiced that leadership and training will not solve physiological differences between men and women, and some are worried that they will be involuntarily assigned to combat MOSs or even assigned to an infantry unit in a support position, which would require them to meet the higher physical standards for infantry units. Do you share these concerns, sir? And what concerns do you have regarding the retention of our best female Marines who may now be assigned to combat arms, MOS, or units?
Well, Senator, as the committee members and in unanimity have talked about today, we have to do everything possible to not lower standards. In fact, we should be looking at how we can raise the standards to improve our capability. Right now, there is no intent to involuntarily assign anybody or who wants to compete in any of these MOSs. A little more problematic is the assignment of a Marine in a non-combat MOS, but assigned to one of these units, because in the past, because it was restricted to men, we didn't ask a communicator or a supply Marine if they wanted to go to an infantry battalion. So we have established an assignment policy which has a minimum physical standard before we would do that. So we're working our way through that, and that's part of the implementation process. But we're aware of that. That's kind of an outlier that wasn't considered as part of this decision. As far as career progression, there are a lot of things we don't know, and we're going to find out, and we'll have to continue to monitor. We're looking at this as a decade minimum long study to see how this all turns out, what effect is there on propensity to enlist, propensity to re-enlist, what is the competitiveness for promotion, what's the injury rate, not just for all Marines, because we really haven't looked at this in the past because there were enough people, and there are still enough people. So those are concerns, but they're concerns about something we don't know the answer to. So there are a lot of different views, as you found when you talk to people. So we're taking all this into consideration. We're going to try to mitigate as much of this as we can, and then we'll come back and report, and we'll keep the data, and we'll be able to have a better analytical view on how this is all working as we go through this in a very methodical, objective way. But the three lenses we're looking at through this whole process is the mission, effectiveness and readiness of the unit, the health and welfare of all the Marines, and the ability to manage the talent. I think one of the things that I'm confident is going to be, in fact, I know it's already happened, is the assignment of female Marines to previously restricted units and the MOSs that they have. In the past, if you were an infantry or an armor battalion commander, in the best, pick an MOS. Intelligence officer, communications officer, motor transport officer in the division was a woman, she couldn't work in your unit. So now you actually have the opportunity to have her serve with you. So the talent pool is expanded, and that should make the unit better.
Very good. Thank you, General. General Milley, many of the command positions, with those positions, most of our Army senior leaders have served in various elite units. Yourself, you have been serving, or you have served in a Special Forces capacity. Many of those advancing to very high levels within the Army have served in Ranger Regiment and other high-performing infantry-type units. While there have been 3 female graduates of Ranger School in the Army, which I applaud, I think that's tremendous, the unfortunate truth is an infantry officer without a Ranger tab is often looked down upon by their fellow infantrymen, and tabless infantry officers are often not as competitive for senior leadership positions, just like many of those that will serve in these elite type units with very, very high standards. So as you branch female officers to infantry and potentially accept branch transfers for captains and field grade officers, how will this affect their ability to integrate into the infantry community and be competitive for those higher levels of command?
A couple of points, Senator. One is you're correct. There's an institutional bias, especially in the infantry, if you don't have a Ranger tab on career progression. So we encourage all infantry officers to attend Ranger School, very demanding school, as you well know. And for women, it'd be the same thing. If they go in the infantry, we'd encourage them to go to Ranger School because it does enhance your performance and skills, but it also enhances your credibility with peers, superiors, and your subordinates as well. So Ranger School is a very important school, especially for the infantry. As far as long-term career progression goes, the core business, the CORE business of the United States Army is to close with and destroy the enemies of our country in close combat. And that means infantry and armor, supported by attack aviation and combat engineers. But infantry and armor is the very essence of the United States Army. And those, as we know, and we're here discussing, Those have been previously closed. So the senior officers of the Army over many, many years have been infantry and armor officers because that's the essence of the business, so to speak. So I would expect that over time, 25, 35 years sort of time, we'll see women in infantry and armor units eventually rise to command. We opened up Apache helicopters 25 years ago, and recently we now have Apache battalion commanders that are female. So I think the same phenomenon will occur over an extended period of time.
Very good, gentlemen. I appreciate that. I do have one question, and I would just like a response for the record follow-up. But Secretary Mabus, I was disturbed to read that the Director of Naval Intelligence has not had an active clearance for over 2 years. Your decision to keep him in a position with such great responsibility without access to critical information sets a terrible example for our sailors and makes a travesty out of naval intelligence and our national security. And for the record, I'd like to know what is preventing you from having a sailor with an active security clearance in this position today, and I would like a follow-up on that, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
You want to respond now?
Senator, I'm as frustrated as you are about this particular individual. There's an investigation ongoing. We have no information one way or the other as to whether anything improper happened. But because of the sensitive place that he occupied, I felt that I had to withdraw his access to classified information until the investigation was finished. Investigation has dragged on and on and on. And we are in the process of putting up another officer to take that person's place.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. 2 years is a very long time not to have access, and I do believe that there should have been another officer assigned to that billet.
Senator, I agree with you. This has been a very long, very drawn-out process, and it's been frustrating for everybody involved.